So I want to talk about Kinkoi, and it wasn't meant to be a review, but actually it was just like, oh, I'm going to talk about the sad reality that everything has to have a fucking route, even though it's just hurting the experience. But the more I wrote, the more it's like, well, I'm already halfway through the review anyway, so I'll just make a full review out of it. Like the whole thing is like I gave Kinkoi an 8, and it's really like a 6 or a 7 with a 9 true ending. Without the ending, it's pretty by the books, and it had some paths that could have been interesting, but they just kept it as purely fan service. Some of the tracks are great, especially the instrumental version of the OP in Golden Time, and even the basic ED was also good, but I think nothing really compares to the beats of the true ending, or at least the true ending theme song. The rest are just there to fit the mood, and you won't remember them. It looks okay, you know, just a couple of CGs that I do like. Hey, these look cool, but it's not anything for me. Basically, I wouldn't be able to notice if any of these artists are working in a different VN. I guess the cool thing about it is like I just saw there was like fucking 6 artists in there and it all looks consistent. So that was like, hey, this is pretty impressive. But also I was like, that's kind of sad at the same time. Akane is locked until you finish any other routes, which is weird since she doesn't really provide anything new. So I guess she's considered just as the extra, but I think she's also required for the true route as well. When you just finish them all, it unlocks the true ending as like in the menu, which is also kind of weird since the only route you really need is Sylvie's to get the true ending. Or at least that's what you should just need to. Like Ella's route is a weird one because it shares some points with Sylvie's route, to the point that one of the small conflicts in Sylvie's route would not be a conflict if you just read Ella's route first. And I liked Ella's route here and there, but the porn got pretty fucking annoying fast. But that's the thing that happens a lot in this VN. It happens in a lot of VNs. I think the more you read, the more you go through, the more the porn just fucking annoys you. Because it's not anymore like, oh, here's a good H scene, and now, okay, now let's go back to the story for a bit. And hey, there's another good H scene. It's like, no, it's a parade of freaking H scenes with maybe a 2-minute scene in between. It's like, dude, can we have something else? And a lot of it's like, oh, it's the reward for you. You got here. It's like, I want the experience. I want the plot. Stop giving me this shit. And a lot of it's like, yeah, just play the all ages. And that's fair because, yeah, that's a good alternative. But then what if there's that one, like that 10% chance that, hey, there's a really good scene in here? And that kind of happened, but not as well as some other ones I've read. It's kind of by the books and it works. It's fine. Anyways, that was like a tangent. Like Reina's route is also pretty standalone, and it's to the point that you can just replace 2 of the better scenes in her route and superimpose into Sylvie's route. It wouldn't feel like out of place or anything. It would work. It would just boost Sylvie's route even more. And that's like the part I want to talk about. It's like a lot of this can be taken out. I could take out Ellie's route. I can take Akane's route. I can take out Reina's route and just have these 2 and it'd be perfectly enjoyable. It'll be shorter. It'll be very concise. Everything will be fun. Everything will be well done. Like, let's say go back to Reina's route. It's like the first porn scene happens is a fucking threesome with the crabby ass person. And it feels like, oh, whoever wrote this didn't know how to progress their story to, like, oh, now they're going out. So, like, well, fuck it. Threesome time. I also don't think that there was, like, this asshole in Reina's route because, like, oh, Ayaka, who's, like, the crabby person, was trying to get this, like, actor or whatever into their company. And I don't think that's the same guy that was part of, like, Sylvie's route. But I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they're not the same guy. But it could work as like the link between them. But right. Like the only real link is how Ria accepts Oro's choices and some hints on Ria that were really necessary since Sylvie's parts of it were already pretty fucking blunt. Honestly, half the point scenes just brought the VN down, especially the threesome like I talk about. Especially when they could have led to some interesting alternatives or like some bad endings, but didn't go for it. Like in Sylvie's route, you can have the threesome with the younger sister, and like, oh, maybe there's gonna be some conflict between the nobles now because, like, well, now the younger one's pregnant or some shit. It's like nothing happens. Like, well, this is boring. You could have something really cool with it. And there could have been the same thing with Reina's route, where it's like, oh, halfway through, you can like, fuck it, I'm going with Ayaka instead or something, and that would have been fun. I guess it would be something different, though. I guess there's a lot of fans that get angry for that kind of shit where it's like, oh, it's not super purity shit, then everybody gets angry, and I just laugh. It's funny. There's also some weird parts that are kind of confusing since they change once you're in Ria's route, where it all sums up to the point where Sylvie's just lying about parts of the past, otherwise Ria would never have a fighting chance against her. And that leads to some inconsistency since now you know that Sylvie also likes the protagonist since they were kids, right? But also pushes them into a relationship with like Ellie and Reina as well. It's like, okay. Because now you're not removing your own chance, you're also taking away Ria's chance. It's like, dude, that's kind of fucked up. And it's like she wants Oro to be happy, so it makes sense. But at the same time, it's like a lot of it is weird. She's like, oh, I like Soma-kun, but then she knows who Soma-kun is, but she also likes the main character, but then will not say that. It's very weird once you get Ria in the picture. There's other sections like that where it's like you can question it, but a lot of it's like, oh, it's VN magic, and you just need a level of like suspension of disbelief to make it work. I don't mind it. Honestly, a lot of the romance movies will break apart if you question like half of it. So it's fine. I had fun. Some of the routes are fun. Well, actually, all the routes are okay-ish. There's parts I didn't like in each route, but the routes are fine. There's no real order of the routes. Akane's crush is most blunt in Reina's route, so it would make more sense to do Reina's first and then hers, but Reina's is also a decent lead up to Ria's route, even though Sylvie's technically the better choice for that, because it transitions perfectly. But then that means you're also doing Ud's route before Sylvie's route, and that kind of messes up their small section of the conflict shit, like I talked about before. They could have just withheld the guy's name and it would work just as well at that point. You could have just do Sylvie before Sylvie without any of the conflict. Honestly, I'd give the whole thing a 9 if they removed every route except Sylvie and Ria, like I said before. The weird thing is, without how much they try to tell the player that Ayaka also has a crush on this kid, she ends up not having her out until the fan disc. But then Akane has the route. I was like, dude, what the fuck? Like, it's to the point that Reina could have been the extra instead of Akane, and then have Ayaka be the third main for it. Because hey, it makes sense. It's all the childhood people, right? But no, it's like, oh, fuck it. Ayaka and the fan disc. Oh, okay. So now to the actual thing I want to talk about. There's a whole dichotomy of wanting to have the best experience possible, having a route for as many characters as possible. And it's not like you can't have both, but that rarely fucking happens. Either some of the routes suffer or it gets patted up the ass. Pro Channel did a pretty good job of it, but there was also a route or two that was pretty iffy, but I think it's just one. Chrono Clock has the same issue where it all interlinked really well, but it never found the guy or person, right, that really liked every route. They either disliked Makoto or they disliked Masaki, right? Hell, I'm assuming there's one guy that hates every character, right? And the reason why I have Symphonic Rain so high is because they handled it really well as well, but that's because I lucked out in the reading order, where it would be less experience if you chose Torta first. And not because like, oh, now a lot gets lost, it's just because the transition between Torta to finale was the best way possible. It would still work, like you would get like, oh, it wouldn't be a 10 for me, it would be a 9. It's that kind of thing. And then there's Key, where I've seen a lot of people complain about Clematis. I have a whole thing about that. It's not published yet, I think, unless I published that before this one. And I complained a good amount of Little Buses routes that all of them are pretty fucking mid, and it only gets raised because of Refrain and the X routes. Anyways, Kinkoi has that issue, where basically everybody has a route outside of the two that gets in the fan disc, and they're just not really needed. They either have to bring in different points that all coincide to a focal point like Symphonic Rain, or have a focal point that gets demonstrated in different ways like Canvas 2 or in Clannad, or have all the routes somehow conjoin like almost every title mentioned above in some degrees, except maybe Symphonic Rain because it doesn't do it for some points. And that could have been done if they added an extra scene to every ending where they found a golden emblem and throw it back to the lake for a different reason than what they were in Ria's route. Then you see the whole loops, it would work fine. It would, it would solidify the concept to more than just one-time thing. Because the French movie they bring up is pretty important overall to the VN, not to the extent Dandelion Girl to Clannad, but it's pretty close. Because the whole thing about the French movie is like, oh, Reese is watching with the main character, and she doesn't like that. Like, oh, the death of the character is a cop-out, since it's just a story beat with nothing fleshed out about it. It's just to get sales for it. And I saw some people say it's like they kind of did the same thing that Rio was complaining about, so they kind of shot their own foot. I wouldn't really say so, but I did link the joke where Ria's complaining about all the tits in the movie, and at that point, whoever's reading this saw like 15 CG's worth of tits before even hitting this part. So it's funny to me. The whole focus is still on the Protax Golden Time. It was the main focus throughout the VN, and I was expecting a lot more to come from it, but they appear for a second and then they vanish again. It was spread out the longest in Rangers route. I felt it was done really well there. I felt it was the only time where he's finally back to what he used to be, to the point that Ria even points it out to herself, and then they just don't fucking do it again until Ria's route. Anyways, they're going full blast in the final route with their golden time thing, where yes, Ria is still important, but everybody already knows how it's going to end. We know she's going to fucking die. The whole focus is on Oro and how he deals with it, and that's something that's different in the French movie, where she's off, or she as the protagonist of the French movie is off, and the main character is trying to find her, only to end up finding like, oh, she's already dead. Oh, now he's sad. And I think it's done really well, except the writer kind of shot himself in the foot with the fan disc, because now some magic shit happened. I think it's with the looping, and now Ria's also kind of okay for a little bit from what I've read. but that's also probably the company making him do it, or her. I don't remember who wrote this. After thinking it's like, oh, the base game, a lot of people's gonna be pissed off, so let's do this to make people happy. And I'm assuming there's gonna be a lot of people like, yay, Ria's back. And then there's the other group is like, you broke the point. It was a great premise. It was done well. You fucked it up. Like, I think I have to find an interview for that, see if the team confirmed, but I really don't care as well. But back to the original point, it's just kind of sad that you're always kind of screwed over, where the overall experience is getting jeopardized because adding that extra route is also a possibility of extra sales. Having the end just being about Sylvie and Ria would have been a better experience. You have the rest of the cast that's just as the cast that enriches the plot and it worked fucking fine. Like, they could have done a lot with Ayaka, but didn't, because like, well, she's not getting a route this time, so fuck it, just put it over there. Let's not introduce her to a lot of concepts. And the funny thing is, Kinkoi doesn't even do a bad job on it because these characters still exist in the other people's routes. Compared to like other VNs where like, hey, you're in this route, every other character is just fucking gone for 90% of it. And hey, it's not like I'm against everybody having a route. Just make it worthwhile. I could take maybe an hour out of Raina's route and put in Sylvie's route, and nothing would be lost. Add an extra chapter or two on Sylvie's route to include Ellie's parts. Nothing would be lost after that. Hell, I'd be fine if they added more scenes to each ending like I said before, and just enforce the looping. Everything would be fine. Add it so each time it happens, a fragment of some kind of memory goes along with it, to the point that the concept of always having golden time ingrained into it. Because the whole speech of their golden time eventually setting only for it to eventually rise up again would work with this looping shit. To the point that Oro is just hanging out with Ria throughout her childhood instead of just that 1 year in school. Where it's like, yes, she still dies, but they have a lot more time together. Like, the best example I can give is maybe Nanaro Reincarnation, right? Where it should have just been the one route, and maybe include parts sub-route or the side routes into the main route. And I think they did that or something like that with the all ages version. I heard the all ages version is actually better than what the 18 plus version is. Even Refrain from Little Busters works because they could have just added the rest of the cast but chose just to stick with the original 5. And outside of like knowing some people that like Saya's route more, most people know will point Refrain being the best part of Little Busters. Kinkoi is one of my favorite characters I've read that I still remember. That dude doesn't have a route, he's still barely there, but he's so fucking memorable to me. We can have memorable characters, not everything needs a route.